The Protector by Rachel Pollack. Originally published in the summer 1986 issue of Interzone magazine, which they reproduced the following year for Interzone, the second anthology. It was included in a German anthology showcasing worldwide women in science fiction in 1993 and appeared in a collection of the author's stories called Burning Sky in 1998. Read by Darrell T. Smith II for my channel Quasar Spectra. The Protector. "I'm afraid I've got some bad news," Dr. Steiner said. He paused, as if waiting for some reaction. Lynn just sat there, her back hardly touching the expensive leather chair. "I've run all the tests I could think of, looking, well, for anything at all, and I'm afraid, Mrs. Busher, that the tests have shown no pathology." Lynn sighed. Her shoulders slumped, and she leaned back. "You're sure? There can't be anything? Blood levels, wave patterns, hormones? But I'm sorry, Mrs. Busher." He didn't sound sorry. She could imagine his distaste for having her in his office. She said, "In other words, I'm sane." "Well, that terminology—" Dr. Steiner's voice slowed to a slur, and his face shifted. The ears grew longer and pinned back. The cheekbones stood out. The eyes sunk deep in round sockets like gun barrels, and two tongues played with each other across lips covered in a hard black crust. Lynn began to cry, softly, as she averted her gaze to the paneled wall and Dr. Steiner's diplomas and honorary degrees. When she turned back, he was normal again. She said, "There's nothing else you can do? No tests? I've done them all. The results? No medicine? I can only prescribe medicine for people with disorders. And since I don't... Oh, shit." Annoyed, Dr. Steiner fiddled with a paperweight replica of the old White House. "Why did I go to the best?" Lynn thought. If she'd gone to some cheap MD, she could have pretended he didn't know what he was doing. She stood up, feeling a little dizzy. "Thanks," she said. "Thanks a lot." He didn't deserve her anger, but he was there, an easy target. Dr. Steiner said, "There won't be any charge. I've already told my secretary." Lynn half smiled. "What is this? Be Kind to Lost Souls Week?" "Call it medical ethics. A case like this passes beyond our proper area." "That's terrific, Doctor." A light shone around his eyes, and Lynn caught her breath, afraid he would change again. But the light faded, leaving the psychiatrist intact. "Tell me," she said as she slung her red tote bag over her shoulder, "what's the money going to do for me when I'm drowning? Or do you think the plague will take a check?" "I don't think we need to talk about that." "You don't. All you need to do is get rid of me." She wanted to slam the heavy wooden door, but the springs only made a soft hiss as they braked the weight. A short corridor of closed doors led from the office to the waiting room. Lynn stopped with her hand half raised to push open the door. Suppose the people on the other side had changed. Suppose the whole room had vanished, flinging her onto the ravished surface of Gabriella H3. Sweating, she thought she couldn't take that. Not now. Hell, not ever. "Please," she prayed vaguely, "keep it the way it's supposed to be." She pushed open the door. Okay, it was okay. The people had stayed comfortably human. The room had kept its neat rectangular shape. The gray couch and the soft chairs with their old-fashioned floral prints hadn't changed to rocks or blasted buildings or trees or anything else. Peter threw down his magazine and hurried up to her, unconsciously stopping a few feet away. Deliberately, she walked past him to the coat rack. She handed him his nylon windbreaker. "Here," she said, and put on her checkered raincoat. She didn't bother to button it. "What did he say?" Peter whispered. "We don't have to pay." "What?" Peter said. "I don't understand." "Oh, come on," she said, and led the way past the secretary, who pretended not to notice them. They walked down the carpeted stairs to the street door where Lynn looked out through the peephole before she opened the door. Normal. Nothing had changed on 71st Street. The usual limousines and taxis glided up and down. The few pedestrians walked large exotic dogs. When they stepped outside, a thin rain was falling. Lynn nodded at the cool wet on her face. No drops of fire, no sharp crystals cutting her skin. Would it stay? That time at her cousin's house upstate, the snow had started out so innocently. She remembered how she and Jeanette, her cousin's daughter, had run out for a snowball fight on the lawn by the lake. And then it changed. She'd felt something sharp, and her face stung. When she'd reached up, her glove had come away covered in blood. Poor Jeanette. No idea why Aunt Lynn had started screaming and running for the house. Not that Aunt Lynn had had much idea either. At the car, Peter tried to take her hand, but she pulled it back. He did a bad job of keeping the worry from his voice as he asked, "Why don't you tell me what he said?" She spun around. "He said I'm sane. No pathology. Isn't that great?" There was a moment when she hoped Peter would just hug her and stroke her, not say anything. Instead, he said casually, "Maybe that means it'll all go away." He avoided touching her as he unlocked her door. "Sure," she said, "just like that." As they drove uptown, Lynn hardly listened to Peter's attempts at conversation. He was just releasing platitudes, she knew. She felt like he was sponging her with disinfectant. Lynn just felt so tired. For weeks she'd strained to hold on to the hope she would turn out to be crazy, chemically imbalanced, curable with some colored pills. In a way, now that she had to give that up, she could relax. She leaned back against the car seat, her head against the plastic, and her eyes staring lazily through the top of the windshield at the cloudy sky. She was thinking of something that had happened to her when she was a kid, 11 years old. No, 12, because it happened the same year they finally banned spaceflight, and they held all those ceremonies, as if that would keep the plague away. So she was 12, because it happened a couple of months after her 6th grade class had marched in that big parade on Main Street. The strange thing took place in her grandmother's apartment building, in the hallway where she'd gone to throw something down the compactor chute. An insect bit her. She'd opened the door to the compactor room, made a face at the smell, dumped the bag of garbage, and was half out the door when a beetle or something ran out from under a crumpled newspaper. The next thing she knew, a sharp pain had shot up her leg. She screamed and fell backwards so that the door scraped her side as it clanged shut. A moment later, it seemed everyone was bending over her so close she couldn't breathe. And then she heard sirens and bells and people shouting so loud she couldn't make out anything they said. The beetle must have carried some kind of poison because Lynn had fallen asleep and couldn't seem to wake up no matter how hard she tried. When she did open her eyes, her father told her that she'd slept for 2 weeks. She'd gotten excited that would beat her friend Gail, who bragged at how much she slept, and then she just fell asleep again. The next time she woke up, it was for real, and she found herself in a hospital room surrounded by flowers. While her mother showed her all the presents everyone had brought her, Lynn tried to figure out what she could have done during 2 weeks of sleep. She was sure, somehow, that she'd kept herself very busy, no matter what her parents said. She could only remember one thing, though. It was a dream, of course. She'd understood that. In the dream, she'd climbed to the top of the school building. It was a very windy day, and she became scared she'd be blown right off the roof, so she bent down to hold on to an old brass telescope bolted to the rooftop floor. Something came and landed, digging bright claws into the edge of the roof. A spaceship, she thought, and became scared someone would see and report her. But then she saw it wasn't a ship. It was a bird, huge and made all of metal. She climbed onto its back and held onto a steel feather as it lifted into the air. Night came, and the bird spiraled higher and higher until she could see the whole planet and then the solar system, like 9 animals racing round and round a fire. Finally, the bird dove, going faster and faster, with Lynn hanging on and her hands getting all cut up until she finally had to let go. The wind carried her around the world in helpless cartwheels and somersaults. Then somehow she became everywhere at once, because she could see everything. Her house, her grandmother's apartment building, the school, foreign cities she'd only seen on TV, the ocean and the mountains, day and night. Lying in her hospital room, the 12-year-old girl couldn't remember anything else. Now, in her car going home from the psychiatrist, the 31-year-old woman thought how they should have known then. Her parents should have known. What a waste. Sending her to college, encouraging her to do something with her life, getting married. "What now?" Peter said. Lynn sat up. They were on First Avenue, heading for the drive, she supposed, but now traffic had backed up, with people honking horns, leaning out of windows. Peter got out of the car and stood on tiptoe, holding on to the door. "Jesus," she heard him say. "I don't believe it." Curious, she got out, looked over the row of cars. There was someone there, sitting in the middle of the street, surrounded by packages, a bag lady or something. But what was she wearing on her head? Some kind of funny hat? No, she should have guessed. What else would it be but one of them? She clenched her fists against a queasiness wrenching inside her as she stared at the huddled figure in its sack, made of some metallic cloth. You could hardly see the actual material for all the junk attached to it. Small carvings, drawings, and pieces of cloth in transparent pockets, bits of circuit board and silicon chips, bones, pieces of animal skin, rocks, torn book covers. And on its head, brilliant, she thought. A hat. Terrific. On its head, the creature, she couldn't think of it as a person, wore a black helmet with a white beak nose and curved metal tubes coming out the sides, like the landing struts of a spaceship. What was it doing? It had spread some things around it so that the cars couldn't get past. Souvenir statues of famous buildings, broken toys, a coil of rope. "What the hell is he doing there?" Peter said. "Does he think he's protecting us? Christ, the street's clear. We don't need any goddamn protection." Lynn stared at him just as he turned to look at her, his mouth half open as if the words had forced their way out. "Shit," he said. "I'm sorry, Lynn. I'm sorry." "What are you sorry to me for? Are you crazy? Do you think I have anything? Just because I get some bad dreams or something? I'm sorry, honey. I didn't mean anything. Of course it's got nothing to do. You're ready to give me up. All set to sign me off. Are you afraid I'll suck you in after me? Is that what you're afraid of?" "I didn't mean anything. You know I was just trying. Look, I'm on your side." "Are you afraid it's catching?" "Lynn, stop it. You're just upset because of that idiot doctor." "He's not an idiot. Top of his profession. Best money can buy. You said so yourself." "All right, he's not an idiot." "Peter, let's forget it, okay?" "No, I want you to realize." "Please, please, Peter, just stop talking, okay? I don't want to talk." "We're going to get over this, Lynn." Sure we are. Now just shut up, okay?" A couple of cops arrived to shunt the traffic around the crouched figure. Lynn heard someone say, "Why don't they just cart him away?" Lynn knew that wouldn't happen. Federal law made it a crime to remove a protector, no matter where they set themselves. You just had to wait for them to get up and go back to their shelters. She remembered the TV story last year about the protector who'd moved into some Wall Street office and the whole firm had had to relocate. Great joke, that. She and Peter had really laughed at that one. As they drove past, Lynn rolled the windows up tight, hoping to banish the scratching noises and the bird-like calls that somehow managed to dance above the engines and the blasts of the policeman's whistle. In her dreams that night, she was Jason Benedict, plodding in his spacesuit through the ruin of a city on Gabriella H3. The black wind roared all about her, streaking the sky and coating her visor. In the dream, she thought of it as a windshield, with nuclear ash. With each step, she had to calculate which way to lean into the shifting wind. They'd have to junk the spacesuit, her dream self thought. As soon as he was back on the ship, out it would go. It was contaminated, infected. They'd have to get rid of it. For now, however, she blessed its insulation. But why were the arms and chest hung with bones and toys and pieces of hardware? And who'd painted that striped face above the crotch? She was walking towards a square building with a dome roof, the only structure left completely intact in the whole city. A strange idea occurred to her, and she said it aloud to broadcast it up to the ship. Maybe the Gabbies had built the thing after the Holocaust, a last gasp of engineering elegance before the collapse. Ridiculous, Captain Santori bleeped back at her. They'd be too busy killing each other for food. And then she was inside, and her helmet was gone so that she felt the heat on her bare face as she looked at the panels showing animals covered with insects and clouds with bird-like faces embedded in their dark swirls. From room to room she walked, shouting excitedly about the perfectly preserved artifacts, the statues, the endless sky maps, and the drawings, wall after wall, each telling the same story over and over again. Squat, four-legged creatures, some kind of black cloud, insects, metallic-looking birds. For a moment she was home, her parents' kitchen late at night, and she was looking for her sister Suzanne, who'd stayed out with some wild friends. Knives lay all about her feet as she angrily scanned the lawn which stretched out over hills and domed cities. She thought to herself, believing somehow she was thinking about Suzanne, who put those domes up? Do they really think they can keep something out when they know it's already inside? There came Suzanne at last, but look at that. She was walking on all fours again, with her head tilted up like a dog when she'd promised them. How could you protect her if she didn't do as she was told? Her friends danced around her. They were draping her body with ropes. They wore masks, bright red masks with metal wings and beaks carved in bone. And then she was Jason Benedict again, thinking how something didn't look right. The arrangement of things didn't seem to serve any ritual functions. It was all too logical, too linear, with everything laid out like a lesson made as simple as possible, as if they aimed it at children, or aliens. They meant it for us, she thought, and knew somehow she mustn't tell anyone. They would lock her up. They would hurt her. She made a mental note to herself. Get rid of the spacesuit. It's infected. Kneeling down to stare at a display of model animals, she wondered why the lesson, the museum or whatever it was, seemed to ignore the nuclear disaster. Maybe they had built it before and somehow made it strong enough to survive the war. She heard a sound behind her, a thumping noise. One of the rooms was coming to life. She ran, her heart beating against the metal suit. And then she was in a large house, in a room with rows and rows of empty shelves, and at the end large glass doors looking out on the street several floors below. People were marching there and shouting and burning banners with her name. Jason Benedict, written over and over in black paint, as if each time the name burned they could kill her all over again. "It's not my fault," she shouted. "I don't want to go. I want to stay here with my husband." She felt a gust of wind and turned to see a large bird fold its wings as it landed beside her. It turned its face to her. Lynn sat up in bed. She pressed her elbows against her ribs and rubbed her eyes. "What is it?" Peter said. He touched her, but gingerly, as if her skin could give off a shock. "It's nothing," she said. "It's just a nightmare." "Maybe you should tell me." "I just did. It's nothing." She lay back on her side, turned away from him. With a sigh, he lay back down again and put his arm over his closed eyes. Lynn didn't dare move until she was sure he was asleep, and even then she got up very slowly and half tiptoed out of the bedroom. In the bathroom, she washed the night grime off her face, rubbing her eyes until they ached. She was afraid to open them after she dried herself. She held the towel up in front of her. "It's just a dream," she told herself, and the dream didn't mean anything, just her subconscious making the obvious connection. Anyone would have connected that. She let down the towel and opened her eyes. Quickly, she looked around the room, taking inventory. It was okay. Just like the waiting room at the doctor's office, everything was where it should be. She should give the place a good cleaning, she thought. Maybe it was all going to be okay. The tub looked grimy, the mirror all streaked. Maybe it would all just stop. She poked at a bit of caked toothpaste, then wetted her finger in the sink to rub off the mark. Maybe it had all just finished up. The whole place could use a good cleaning. It was so sweet of Peter not to complain. She thought of him touching her in the bed and shivered a moment, telling herself it was the nighttime chill. She'd better put on a robe or go back to sleep. She looked at herself in the mirror. Everything sagged. Everything looked so old. There was that time he went to kiss her and his face started to come away, and there was someone else, something else, waiting inside, waiting its turn. Better give the whole house a cleaning, she thought, and maybe do an exercise class. Get some of that ache out of her. If you could just peel off the old skin or let someone take it off and get back to work, she told herself. She'd put things off much too long. There were all those letters to answer, ads to send out. Maybe it was all going to go away. That was why the tests didn't show anything. She'd healed herself, spontaneous healing. And of course she'd dreamed of Benedict. It was only normal. Anybody would have made the connection. It was just the fears coming up. Maybe that's how she'd cured herself. Or maybe it signaled the end. Last stuff coming up. Go back to sleep, she thought. A lot to do tomorrow. Today. Her breasts and belly itched, and she started to scratch, then pulled her hands away. Because of the nylon nightgown, she told herself. You could give yourself a nasty rash. In the bedroom, she stood over the bed, listening to her husband's wheeze. Better sleep on the couch, she thought. Then she wouldn't have to listen, or worry about waking him. He looked so angry when he slept. He just needed some rest. Maybe they should both go on a holiday. Might be their last chance. She rolled her eyes, flicked her hand to chase away the wrong ideas. There'd be lots of holidays, all the ones they could possibly want. She snatched up her pillow, got down the extra blanket, and plodded into the living room to curl up on the couch. Lynn made sure not to get up until after Peter was gone. Groggy, she swayed into the bathroom. Peter had closed the glass shower doors again. Furious, she felt like throwing him through them. Why couldn't he remember the simplest things? She took a breath, her eyes on the cloudy doors. Anything could hide in there, whole. No, she was all through with that. If she let herself get scared, she could end up talking herself. She touched the door, pulled her fingers away, reached out again. When she opened it, she smiled, a comment on how silly she'd been. Her brilliant husband, she saw, had left the tap in the shower position. "He can't remember anything," she said out loud. Her voice sounded thick, and she remembered that one time when her own voice had attacked her, turning into some growling creature outside her body. Maybe she should take a shower. Prove she could do it. Prove the water wouldn't turn to steam or knives. Prove she could close the doors and not be trapping herself. She reached out. At the last moment, she flicked the switch to bath before she opened the faucet. There was plenty of time, she told herself. No need to push. Lynn spent most of the day cleaning. It felt good to be normal, she told herself several times in the day. When she ran out of Glass-X, she got in the car and drove to the mall, just like anyone else. Hungry, she sat down in a restaurant full of people and ordered a chicken salad on toast and a coffee. She didn't even look at the other people while she was waiting, and when the food came, she just picked up her sandwich and took a bite, just like anyone else. It was really true, she told herself. She'd had a couple of bad moments, she didn't know why, but so what? They didn't mean anything, and then she'd just talked herself into a state. After the meal, she deliberately stopped to look at boots, curtain material, whatever caught her eye, just like anyone else. On the way home, she almost turned on the car radio before deciding it was better not to push herself, not while driving. She could listen to the radio at home, or a record, but when she got in the house, she decided she preferred the silence. Plenty of time. The radio could wait. After dinner, she told Peter, "You can watch TV if you like. It won't bother me." "Are you sure?" he said. "Go ahead. I'll get going on some letters." "You sure?" "Go ahead. There must be a game or something. I'll do the dishes." He said quickly, "I'll do them." "You don't have to do the dishes." "Well, you cooked." "Please," she said. "Go. Leave me alone." Lynn cleared the table, then decided to do some work before washing up. Plenty of time, she told herself, and laughed. In the living room, she sat down at the desk Peter had bought for her when she'd started her business. Her red plastic in-tray contained a jumble of letters, some unopened, some half-read and shoved back in the envelope. Lynn's business consisted of tracking down odd things for collectors. Lynn was a congenital browser. She loved going down to New York and looking through the second-hand bookstores, antique shops, old clothing stores, push carts, anything at all that contained piles of assorted treasures. She hardly ever bought anything. She wasn't a collector. She didn't want to own things. She just liked looking. One day at work, she'd been a secretary for the local branch of a national insurance company, someone remarked to Lynn that his wife collected doilies, the kind people once put on furniture to protect from grease stains. Lynn offered to look for some on her next trip to New York, and when she'd brought back two exquisite pieces, as Jack's wife called them, Jack had insisted on paying her a commission. It was Peter who suggested she make a business out of it. There must be loads of people out in Dallas or somewhere who collect old beer mats or lunch boxes or something. Only they can't find what they want in Dallas. Everything is new there. New York is the place to look for junk, and if anyone can find that stuff, it's you. He was wonderful. He offered to back her for a year, enough to see if the idea had a future. He even helped her compose and send out ads to the different collectors' magazines and computer networks. Slowly, over 3 or 4 months, letters had come in, requests, recommendations. Usually, Lynn could find something to satisfy the person, and if not, she would send them a list of possible alternatives. The dealers were beginning to hold things for her, remembering pieces she'd bought for collectors the month before. Lynn loved the work, loved the thought of acquiring a reputation, becoming an expert. And then the attacks had begun. She shook her head at the pile of letters, requests, offers from dealers, bills for ads she'd run. She should sort them all, do the urgent ones first. Instead, she just grabbed a letter, read through it, and rolled a sheet into the typewriter, composing in her mind an apology for the delay. Sickness, personal difficulties. Sickness sounded better. Now that I'm better, she thought to herself, I'll start looking for your piece right away. I hope you'll forgive the delay. Sincerely, etc. In the bedroom, she heard the television. Someone must have scored a goal because the announcer was shouting and the engineers had turned up the fake crowd noises. Lynn thought vaguely of the days when people used to pack into sports stadiums by the thousands. It was such a different world back then. As she listened to the TV, she found herself testing for voices slithering under the commentary and the noises. "Stop it!" she ordered herself and slapped her hand against the desk. A moment later, she was banging the typewriter as loud and as fast as possible. She went to sleep without doing the dishes. In the middle of the night, she woke up feeling guilty, but when she went into the kitchen, Peter had washed everything. Back in bed, she lay on her side with her eyes open, staring at the half-open bedroom door, feeling like she'd dreamed something but couldn't remember what. Finally, exhaustion pulled her back to sleep. Over the next few days, Lynn divided her time between the house and her business, going from washing the kitchen floor to sending out a stack of ads. When she'd answered all her correspondence, she told Peter she'd be commuting to the city for the next few days to do some searching, and did he mind getting his own dinner if she came back late? "Mind?" he said. "I think it's great." "I just feel bad," she said. "You've been so sweet, and I've been neglecting you." He reached across the table to stroke her arm. Automatically, she pulled it back. He pretended not to notice. "You haven't been neglecting me," he said. "You've been sick. I'm thrilled to see you working again." She nodded. Sick. That's what she'd written all those people. She was sick, and now she was better. "I'm sorry," she remembered the doctor saying. "I'm afraid I've got bad news for you." Quack, she thought. He doesn't deserve protection. The next day, Lynn took the train into the city. She began by making the round of the bookstores, renewing contacts and buying a copy of the abridged Whitman edition of Tarzan and the City of Gold for a retired schoolteacher in Cleveland. As she signed for the book, she remembered a letter she'd gotten, one of the first answers to her ads. A man in Denver. After apologies and evasions, he got to the point. Could Mrs. Busher locate any copies of Edgar Rice Burroughs' Mars or Venus books? He knew they'd be hard to find, and he'd pay a lot, and he'd understand if she refused. Lynn had thrown away the letter without finishing it. Space stories. The very idea that someone could ask her. She'd called Peter and told him maybe she should drop the whole idea. He was angry, of course. He wanted to write the guy back or even call him up, but Lynn said she'd forget it if Peter would. The last thing she wanted was for her husband to get into a shouting match with a pervert. The memory filled her with sadness, a pang of lost innocence. Outside, she hurried down 4th Avenue, afraid that if she stood still, she'd start crying in the middle of the crowded street. From the bookstores, she walked down to the turn-of-the-century shops along Bleecker Street, searching for one of those talking coffee pots people had used back then. She didn't find any, but she did come across a double millennium poster from the English Messianic movement. It was in perfect condition, and exactly what a client had described in a letter 7 months ago, just before Lynn's illness. Excitedly, she asked the shop owner if she'd hold it for a few days until Lynn could contact her client. The woman agreed and said she was glad to see Lynn back on her feet again. It was late afternoon by the time Lynn finished her rounds of shops in the village. She'd originally planned to go uptown, show her face on the west side, or at least in some of the pre-century memento shops that had sprung up on 3rd Avenue. But she felt so tired, and she hadn't eaten. Everything would close soon anyway. She could come back tomorrow. Feeling content and proud of herself, Lynn headed for a diner on Broadway where they served huge tuna sandwiches and old-fashioned malteds. But when she got to Broadway, she turned south instead of north and walked some 6 or 7 blocks until she reached the small flea market that had developed on the sidewalk in front of the grimy offices and factories. Searching frantically, she bought an assortment of junk: a rusty can opener, a miniature football, a charm bracelet with plastic faces of movie stars, a broken necklace made of silicon chips, a scarf of the New York skyline, and so on, until her shopping bag couldn't hold any more. When she stood up, her back ached, and there was a buzzing in her ears. She looked at her bag and shook her head. She'd never sell any of this stuff to anybody. It was worthless. She should just throw it away. But she held on to it, and when she got home, she didn't stop to eat. She quickly hid the bag in the coat closet before Peter could get home and notice it. That night they made love, the first time in weeks, with Lynn insisting and stroking and tickling Peter until he ran out of excuses and agreed to come to bed. He took a while to get an erection. She suspected he had to think of someone else to do it, and then he came very quickly, but Lynn didn't mind. She pulled his hand down between her legs and showed him how to stroke her, holding on to his wrist at first to make sure he wouldn't get away. As her excitement built, she bit his shoulder, small, sharp bites, like bird pecks. She bent her arms and hit him with her elbows, laughing as she imagined herself beating his doll-like body with her huge wings. The next day, Lynn returned to the city for her uptown tour, stopping only briefly at the different shops so she could make sure to show her face everywhere. On the train home, she felt satisfied and even slept for a while. That night, she and Peter went to dinner at an Italian restaurant across the river. After they'd ordered drinks, Peter announced that he'd made reservations for them for the weekend at Lake Mohonk in the Catskills. They deserved some luxury, he said, and this weekend was probably the last chance to see the leaves in the mountains before they all started falling. Lynn leaned over the table to put her arms around his neck. Peter grinned as she kissed his cheek. "Be ready Friday afternoon," he told her. He'd leave work early, and they'd get up to the hotel in time for dinner. As the waiter set her spaghetti bolognese in front of her, Lynn discovered she could see the bones in his hands. The skin and muscle had fallen away, and only a coating of ash covered the white. She jerked her head up to see his face. It was okay. Flesh and hair and glasses. He glanced at her, then looked away. "Are you all right?" Peter said. He tried to sound solicitous, but Lynn could hear the anger in his voice. "I'm fine," she said. "Are you sure?" "Yes, I'm sure." Friday afternoon, Lynn was singing as she packed their suitcases and laid out Peter's good suit and blazer along with her green dress and her gold pants outfit. The sun was shining, and when she'd called the weather report, the taped message had promised a warm and clear weekend. A half hour or so before Peter had said he'd come home, she sat down at her makeup mirror in the bedroom, but instead of her own face and the bed and the night table behind her, Lynn saw something. There was only a glimpse, a burnt-out landscape, a flock of birds, a cloud. Then she grabbed a can of hairspray and smashed the mirror. "Oh, God," she said. "God damn it." Her heart thumped like a machine about to explode. She looked around the room, making sure everything had stayed in place. She hated this. She was checking things again, something she thought she'd given up. "God damn," she'd said. She looked at the pieces of glass. Like a vampire movie, just like those old blood films they used to show on TV when she was a kid. The vampires were always smashing mirrors, except they didn't show those anymore. in bad taste, just like space stories. She remembered a comic on TV who'd made a joke about monsters. The next week, he was off the air. No explanation, no apology, just gone. Victim of bad taste. Lynn remembered how she'd agreed with everyone at the office. Some jokes were inappropriate. Wasn't that how her boss had put it? Inappropriate? Peter came home shouting with excitement. He found her sitting in her bathrobe in the living room. "Come on," he said. "Get dressed. Let's go. It's a beautiful evening." "I'm not going," she said. "What? What are you talking about? Come on." He tried to pull her out of the chair, but she slapped away his hands. "I don't feel well," she said. "What's wrong?" When she didn't answer, he said, "Did you have an attack?" "Attack?" she said sarcastically. What a clever expression. "Jesus, Lynn, you use that word yourself." She turned her face away from him. "Look," he said, "I'm just trying to help." "Help yourself, you mean? Why don't you just go and leave me alone?" He sighed loudly. "Great. Romantic weekend for 2 for 1. You'll have a better time." "That's for sure. You know, you might try thinking of someone other than yourself for a change." Lynn said nothing. "It might do you some good." She stared at the floor. "Shit," he said, and slammed the door behind him. When she heard the downstairs door close, Lynn got up and walked to the front window where she could see him drive away. For a moment, the parking lot looked like a blackened plane, the car like some frightened animal. Then everything straightened out again, and he was gone. Peter came back only a few hours later, but Lynn was already in bed. When she woke up, she found a note from him in the dinette. As long as they weren't going away, he might as well do some catching up at the office. He loved her and was sorry they'd had a fight. She was going to be all right. Everything would be fine. She could call him if she liked. Later that day, Lynn went to the mall to get some food for the weekend. It really was a beautiful day. She couldn't blame Peter for getting annoyed with her. She decided to get him a present, and after putting the supermarket bags in the car, she noticed insects crawling on some of the cases and wallets. She made a face and decided to look somewhere else. Just as she turned away, an alarm sounded. While Lynn just stood there, everyone began to run, some for the exit, others for the shops and restaurants, anywhere to get out of the path. Insects, Lynn thought. How could she not have realized? "Lady," a security guard shouted at her, "what are you standing there for? Move it!" He didn't stay to check her. For a moment she lost her footing when someone banged into her, but still she just stood there, looking down the mall at the entrance to J.C. Penney's, where people were running out of the store, slapping at the insects buzzing around their faces and arms. What was she supposed to do? She had no idea what to do. The people from Penny's were screaming, but somehow the sound didn't affect her, as if it came from far away or from a movie. It didn't include her. She stepped to the side to avoid the mob, but she kept looking. It was impossible to tell when the insects turned into birds, but there they were. They flapped around the people left in the open. They pecked at their bodies. Someone snatched at her, pulled her inside a shop and down behind a counter. She struggled for a moment, thinking she should be doing something, but when she got her head above counter level, she saw that one of them had arrived. He wore the same kind of clumsy metallic dress strewn with junk as the one she and Peter had seen blocking First Avenue. He was hitting a metal can with what looked like a rock, and he was wailing or singing above the screams. On his head he wore a helmet with a visor, like something from a spacesuit. An instant later, Lynn's benefactor pulled her down again, and she crouched under the fluorescent glare. She discovered herself disappointed in some strange way. He hadn't looked at her. He hadn't turned around and noticed her at all. She was just the same as everyone else. After a couple of minutes, it all began to quiet down. The running stopped, the screams became isolated voices, the wild flapping ended, and then the drumming and the singing spiraled down. No one on the floor of the shop moved. Even after all the clear sound, the signal that the ambulances had taken away the wounded and the shocked, and that the scanners detected no more manifestations, they still remained hidden. They were waiting until it seemed a good chance the Protector had left them all, a good chance he no longer squatted there to remind them of the attack. For the Protector belonged to the plague. He was as much a part of it as the birds and insects. Lynn crouched with the other victims, all of them averting their eyes from each other, pretending that not seeing meant they weren't there. It was odd. People resented the Protectors almost more than the plague itself. They were like traitors or collaborators. When people started to get up, Lynn stepped back into the open, looking for the place where she'd seen the Protector. It was hard to tell. Everybody was walking back and forth, reclaiming the mall for human territory. They picked up clothes to try on, they examined shoes, they ordered juice or pretzels or chocolate from the stalls in the middle. Any activity at all, so long as it was bland and suggested that nothing unusual had happened. The attack would go unreported in the newspapers or television. Probably people wouldn't even tell their families or friends. She knew she wouldn't tell Peter. She stood there watching the crowd, their refusal to look at each other, their awkward, exaggerated movements, their tight smiles. And as she watched, her mood slid from disappointment to elation. It had nothing to do with her. She was just like anyone else. She hadn't sensed it beforehand. She didn't make it go away or have any idea what to do. And when the Protector came, he took no notice of her. She was just like anyone else. She didn't bother with Peter's present. She went out to her car, then ran back to a phone booth and called Peter at the office. She asked if they could still go for one night, and he said the hotel probably hadn't rented the room on such short notice. If she went home and started packing, he'd call and check. He didn't ask what had changed her mind. That night, Lynn dreamed again of Jason Benedict. She dreamed she was an old man, coughing in a barren room while he wrote his History of the Plague. In the dream, Peter wanted her to go to her sister's wedding, but she refused to leave her notebooks. The work would vindicate her, vindicate space travel, make the world realize he hadn't brought the plague. No one had ever found anything on his spacesuit, not even microscopic spores. And since Earth people could drive away the attacks, how could they possibly come from another planet? Outside her cold room, people were shouting, but she kept writing. She had to get it done before they took it away, before they tore it up and burned it. She wrote about the first attacks, the panic, the discovery of small communities in Asia and Africa, northern Canada and South America, where the shamans and witch doctors kept their people free of the birds and insects. And she wrote about the hospitals, filling more and more with schizophrenics who didn't respond to drugs, but who kept the grounds clear of the plague. His back ached, and he could hardly hold the pen from the cold, but he kept writing. Listen to the Protectors. They call it the other world. They do not mean a planet in space. Listen to them. Outside, she could hear the soldiers marching around the house. No use, he thought. It's no use. They'll just burn it like they burned his picture, like they burned her yellow dress. The dream shifted. She sat in the room, but instead of a book, she was working on a costume. A sheet of translucent gold plastic lay on her lap, and she was sewing things to it. A can opener, the lid of a coffee pot, some crinkly leaves, a pouch containing bits of rock from Earth, and the other place. There was a toy spaceship, wire, a switch from a lamp, feathers. Beside her lay strips of cloth from a yellow dress. Later she would sew them on as well, streamers from her past life. She sewed so fast she kept cutting her fingers and dripping blood on the plastic. She had to finish soon before the next attack. She had to sew the whole world onto it. She would feed them the world. Lynn woke up shivering from the cold mountain night. She pulled the blanket over her shoulders and snuggled against Peter, who grunted and stayed asleep. She had to close the window. They should have known better than to have left it open. She just hated the idea of going up to it in the dark. She considered waking Peter or just turning on the light, but finally she got up and dashed to the window to pull it shut. Outside, darkness soaked the woods. It seemed like it could roll up over the buildings, despite the fence of blue lights surrounding the hotel. Lynn wondered where the protector of this area lived, if the hotel kept a cabin for him or her in some hidden area of the grounds. She hugged herself, wishing she'd brought a warmer nightgown. When she went to pee, she turned on the bathroom light before entering or even looking into the room. It wasn't difficult. The switch was outside the door. There were lots of people afraid to enter a dark room, just as there were lots of people who dreamed about the plague. And Benedict. It was natural, normal, just no one wanted to talk about it. She knew that, in the morning, when Peter asked how she'd slept, she would tell him she'd had a wonderful night. They spent the next day sitting by the lake, walking along the edge of the woods, climbing on the rock paths laid out by the hotel. At a certain point, Lynn spotted a couple of round stones, one black, one white. She let Peter get ahead of her so she could scoop them up into her jeans pocket. Excitedly, she thought how, when she got home, she could add them to the collection in the coat closet. They left at 5, plenty of time to get home before dark. As they drove through the gates, Lynn turned around for a last look at the green and brown buildings. Someone was standing by the entrance, a woman with long, matted hair and a shapeless dress hung with pieces of paper, drawings, photographs. She grinned, showing her sharp teeth, and when she waved her hand, like a hostess saying goodbye to a special guest, the bony fingers looked like claws. Lynn spent Monday and Tuesday going through catalogs, answering letters, making phone calls. Wednesday morning, she decided to do another run to the city. She thought she would not concentrate on anything in particular, but take with her a list of current targets and try to cover as much ground as possible. As she moved from shop to shop, she thought how much she loved this work, how she could go on forever if only the world would leave her alone. Around 4 o'clock, she found herself in the Hudson Flea Market, a large warehouse filled with racks of leather jackets, tables of broken clocks and watches, whole cartons full of scarves or corkscrews or plastic flowers. Lynn had once found a cased collection of Chinese coins, which she then sold to a man in Boise for a 500% profit. Ever since then, she'd used the coins as an excuse to spend an hour or two a month in this place she called Browser's Heaven. Today, however, she stayed no more than 15 minutes. Rummaging through a box of toys so high she had to half climb inside it, she came across an object made of faded and dented metal. Without even thinking what it was, she pulled it loose from the dolls and rifles around it and took it up to Ben, the owner, who sat on a rocker in the back of the shop reading a newspaper. He looked up at her, and before she could say anything, he jumped off his chair. "Where did you get that?" he said. "Did you find that here?" He reached out to take the toy, but Lynn pulled it back out of his reach. "Hey," he said. "I'm sorry, Lynn. I didn't know we had anything like that here. You know, I don't know half of what's in those boxes. If I'd seen it, I would have thrown it away, believe me." For the first time, Lynn looked consciously at the collection of metal tubes and discs. A spaceship. The toy was a model spaceship. In fact, it was a drive ship. "The discovery that changed man's destiny at a single stroke," as someone once called it. That was before one of those ships took Jason Benedict to Gabriella H3. "Here," Ben said. "Let me get rid of it." Again, she held it out of his reach. There must have been thousands of these things, maybe millions. She'd played with one as a kid, her favorite toy, until one day her father came into her bedroom and took it away from her. "I want it," she told Ben. "What? What are you talking about? Don't you know what that is?" She didn't answer. "Don't tell me you've got a buyer for that thing." "How much?" "Hey," Ben said, "you think I want money for it? Take it and get out of here. Wait a second." He handed her a plastic bag. "Stick it in here," he said, "so people don't see, and don't tell anyone where you got it, okay?" At home, Lynn set the drive ship down on the bed. The first time in over 2 hours she'd let it out of her hand. From the coat closet, she took out her collection and set everything beside the ship. She felt a sense of completeness, of something established. She'd need lots more, she knew. Material, some bone for the mask, and above all, rocks and artifacts from out there. But those she could get from the government. They kept whole storehouses full, all of it rescued from the mobs, along with instruments from the ships, pieces of telescopes from the smashed observatories. She laughed at the thought of browsing through all those wonderful warehouses. She looked down at her dress and laughed again. This was the one, the strips she'd seen in her dream. She'd cut up the dress so she could sew her past life onto her costume. Excitedly, she pulled the dress over her head and got down the sewing box. She had the hem of the dress in one hand and the scissors in the other when she gave a gasping cry and dropped the scissors on the floor. She looked from the stuff on the bed to the yellow material in her hand. It was like someone else had taken hold of her. No, she had to recognize the truth. It was her. When she'd put that toy ship with the other things, she'd felt more settled, more complete than at any time in her life. She began to cry, to shake her head from side to side. It was all so sad, all the things she'd have to give up. Peter, her work, their apartment. And how would she tell her parents? They had such good taste. She put the ship, the stones from Mohonk, and the other things back in the box. She held up the dress and with a sigh put that in the box as well, without cutting it. That could come later. Later, when the dress really had become a symbol of her former life. A symbol, and all that remained of it. When Peter came home, he found his favorite dinner: steak, garlic bread, baked potatoes. There was even a chocolate cake for dessert. "What's up?" he said. "Make a big sale?" She smiled. "No, I just thought it would be nice." He kissed her and ran off to take a quick shower before dinner. How much time? Lynn thought. How much time to keep making it nice before the end? The end, it turned out, came over a month later. In those weeks, Lynn had settled into a sleepy kind of happiness, making love with Peter, tracking down items for her customers, sleeping well, and cooking elaborate dinners. Peter said several times how great she looked, how he'd said she'd get over the attacks, and now she was fine, and maybe they should sue that Steiner guy for malpractice. He talked about vacations and brought home travel folders. Lynn kissed him and said how she'd always wanted to visit Bermuda. When the end came, she didn't even know it at first. She'd taken the Ford down to the mall for a charge and a wash. She drove it in a little before noon and went to look for boots and a new raincoat. When she came back an hour later, she found a group of men dismantling her car. She ran up, wobbling as she clutched her packages. The strap of her bag fell from her shoulder to her elbow, bouncing the bag against her knee. "What are you doing?" she shouted. "Leave that alone! What are you doing?" The men paid no attention. There were 5 of them, all dressed in short black jackets and black jeans. They went on lifting off a fender, removing a seat, disconnecting pieces of the engines. Lynn dropped her packages and looked around for help. People were walking by, some in the parking lot, some in the station, waiting for their cars to be charged. No one paid any attention. Lynn ran up to a woman who was getting in her car. "Please," Lynn said, "could you get the police? These men are tearing apart my car." The woman slammed the door and rolled up the window. As soon as she got the engine started, she streaked away. Lynn ran back to her car. "Stop that!" she yelled. "Stop it!" A couple of the men turned their heads towards her. Their faces gave off a silvery glow, and their eyes and noses and ears looked crudely formed, like toys. They opened their mouths and double tongues flicked out at Lynn. She stepped backwards, nearly falling as her foot slid on an oil slick. For the first time she saw their hands, narrow with curved metal pincers and tools instead of fingers. They were robots. But that was impossible. The government had banned robots. They'd scrapped them all, smashed them in huge piles, the same year they'd smashed the spaceships. Lynn moved forward. She realized that the dismantling was revealing something hidden inside the car. As they took off the hood and the roof, they exposed something shiny, with a bowed head and folded wings. The robots lifted off the last piece of the car, and the bird came awake, nodding its head, rustling the steel feathers of its wings. Lynn walked towards it. Before she could touch it, it reared its head back, then brought the tip of its beak slashing down the front of Lynn's body. Her scream died as her skin fell away like wrapping. A gray sludge spilled onto the ground. At first it seemed like everything would empty out. No one would ever find anything left of her. But then she realized she was standing. She felt light. She could float in the air. She could breathe for the first time in years. The bird lifted her onto its back, and together they flew through the air. She could see the shopping center below, and then the houses, the trees, the mountains, and the river, like tape across a knobby surface. Somewhere far below her she could hear shouts, people running, a buzzing noise. She paid no attention, and soon the bird took her so high the sounds faded and the land fell away behind her. They flew for hours through a dark cloud with points of light that formed into faces that broke apart as soon as she passed them. The cloud swallowed her, and she drifted into it, everywhere at once, free of time and memory. And then the bird was landing, and Lynn found herself on a hilltop overlooking a burnt city. She slid off the bird's back, and a group of men and women surrounded her. They all wore sheets of plastic or metal covered with bits and pieces of the world. Their heads looked like helmets, with beaks jutting out from opaque visors. Bent tubes hung down over their necks and shoulders. One of them stepped forward, holding something out to her. A mask, a new head. They wanted her to take it, become like them. "No," she said, "I can't." She looked around for the bird to rescue her, but it was gone. "I can't." No one answered. "You can protect them," Lynn said. They said nothing. "No, please, I don't want to." A woman pointed to the city. Lynn looked at the smashed buildings, the charred remains. In the middle stood a single creature, a domed message left by the last survivors for anyone who might come after them. She was on Gabriella H3. Below her stood the museum with all its statues and drawings, all the warnings about the plague. He was right. Benedict was right. They built it after the war, when they knew none of them would live to tell what had happened. It didn't show the war because the war didn't matter. The war only came because of the plague, because of the panic, the terror, because no one protected them. She looked back at the one holding out the mask. Why does it have to be me? She said. I've got my husband and my work. No one answered. Lynn took the mask and lifted it onto her head, shrugged, and put the car in gear. A small crowd had gathered, but they parted as she drove towards the exit. Someone threw something. It hit the back windshield and bounced off. Lynn looked at the dash clock. 2 or 3 hours until Peter came home. She wondered how she would tell him. She wondered if he'd resist. "We can beat this," she imagined him saying. "You're talking nonsense. You're just hysterical." It didn't matter. She wondered where she'd end up living. Did the government give her a shelter, or would she have to make her own somehow? Probably at first she'd go to live with a teacher. She knew she needed someone. That was the important thing. She couldn't go through it alone anymore. But as for the rest, things like where she lived, it didn't matter anymore. At the end of the Mall Road, she waited for a red light to change before driving onto Route 9. The shadow of a large bird passed across the hood. Lynn smiled. You've been listening to pre-1990s speculative fiction readings with a highlight on science fiction by Darrell T. Smith II. Please consider clicking the donation link in the description box. Thank you so much for your time and your imagination.